Well, good morning, Trinity Church. Welcome to our Sunday Adult Forum this morning. It's great to see you all today. We have a special forum today. We are joined today by Josephine Hicks, who is on the staff of Episcopal Relief and Development, as well as Connie Wilson, a vestry member here at Trinity Church, who has been appointed the representative, or Trinity's representative, with Episcopal Relief and Development. Episcopal Relief and Development is a long-term organization in the life of the church that helps with all types of responses, national and otherwise, that are so important and often are important in our own lives. I think the way I'd like to begin this morning is just simply introduce Connie and have her say a few words about herself, her experience with Episcopal Relief and Development, and her role. Connie, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you so much. I first learned about Episcopal Relief and Development when I was active in the Diocese of Chicago. I was part of the Commission on Global Ministry and was asked to go on the first team trip to the Diocese of Rank, which was our companion diocese from Chicago. So my first
Where's that, Connie?
That's in Africa, in South Sudan in Africa. And my first trip was in 2005, and I went back in 2008. And on that trip, the diocese had raised funds for mosquito nets for the diocese. And that money was basically funneled through ERD, Episcopal Relief and Development, to the Diocese of Rank. And when I was there, I got to see from a clinic where they were handing out these mosquito nets. And this is a happy camper who got a mosquito net for her family. So, I know personally how important it is for the money to get to the right places through the right channels. So I'm delighted to be part of being the link for Trinity.
Well, thank you, Connie. Thank you so much for all you do. I appreciate it. Josephine, welcome. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Trinity Church here in Asheville. Let's just start with you telling us about your role at ERD and the basic overview of Episcopal Relief and Development.
Great. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Connie, and thank you all at Trinity. I'd love to be with you in person. I look forward to a time when we can do that, but I'm grateful for this medium to be able to join you today. Episcopal Relief and Development is you. It is the Episcopal Church doing work around the world, working with communities that are struggling with hunger, poverty, disaster, and disease to create more healthy and fulfilling lives. Here in the US, we do disaster preparedness and response work, busy right now with Hurricane Laura and the fires out west and the pandemic that continues throughout the country and throughout the world. We do that same disaster preparedness and relief internationally as well. We also internationally, so the development piece of our name, do global development work with holistic programming that really is centered around three transformative priorities: women, children, and climate.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your global priorities and how you see the impact there?
Sure. Well, first of all, we selected these priorities carefully for a number of reasons. One is because each of them has truly transformative potential, and I'll explain that a bit as I talk a bit about the work in each area. Another reason is that some of these were cross-cutting themes in our work as we were doing work globally around the world. We noticed, for example, that women couldn't participate in our programs if they were victims of violence. And we know that women cannot be their full selves, everything God dreams for them to be, if they're victims of violence. So focusing on women became an important focus. And the other reason is we're good at this work in these areas. And we wanted to focus on our strengths and there are some other things that other NGOs are really good at. And these are programs that we're very good at. And they include a lot of the things that you're familiar with Episcopal Relief and Development, but we're coalescing them around these priorities. So with respect to women, that work includes promoting gender equality and promoting economic stability and opportunity for women, which is transformative not only for the women, but also for their families, their children, and their communities. And with respect to reducing violence against women, which is a big piece of this program, it includes things you would anticipate, like safe houses and programs that provide immediate security and safety to women who are facing violence. But it also includes dialogue with men and boys to re-examine gender roles and attitudes toward violence, and scripture study with faith leaders. We know that faith leaders are looked to as leaders in their communities, especially on issues of peace and justice. So the program works with faith leaders to examine scripture and rethink gender roles and attitudes toward gender and attitudes toward violence, and engaging community and faith leaders, including interfaith leaders, to take action and speak out against violence, and to provide the tools and skills that support leaders to challenge attitudes and behaviors that perpetuate injustice and discrimination. Our work with children, one of the reasons we decided to focus on children is because, as many of you know, the first years of a child's life up to age 6 are such an important developmental time for a child. Yeah. If a child is malnourished or neglected, not nurtured, stimulated properly, doesn't get proper health care during those critical years, their brain development is literally stunted. It's very hard for those children to catch up. Yeah. So if we can surround children with everything they need during that critical time frame, 15 and 20 years from now, those children are healthy, productive adults who can be leaders in their communities. So the program surrounds children with everything they need to thrive during that time frame, starting with prenatal health for mothers and maternal health, vaccinations for babies once they're born, weighing and measuring babies every month to be sure they're meeting appropriate milestones and planning appropriate interventions if they're not. Delivering malaria nets. Connie, that wonderful program that you saw, there was a time when the nets were distributed, and in some places distributed in a central location like you saw. That program developed in many communities to having community volunteers actually deliver the malaria nets to homes and then go back every month to see if the malaria nets were still in place, to see if they needed to be replaced, and to address other issues. And so this work with children follows that same model. And the community volunteer goes into the home every month, making sure the malaria net is there, talking with caregivers about these critical health issues, talking about sanitation and clean water, delivering seeds for gardens so that they can grow nutritious fruits and vegetables for their children and also have produce to sell to earn income. Parenting skills. The community volunteers talk with caregivers about providing safe environments for the babies and stimulating the babies, and they are put into peer-to-peer parenting groups to learn those skills. They get nutrition classes to learn how to make nutritious meals out of things that are readily available. Things like ground nuts that are very much like peanuts and good sources of protein. Turns out caterpillars are a great source of protein. And from what I hear, they're very tasty when fried. I couldn't tell you that from personal experience, but that's what I hear. So learning how to make nutritious meals from things that are right there, often providing a goat that can provide milk and make cheese and have manure for farming. And then women are usually enrolled in savings groups that operate very much like cooperative banks. So they learn the discipline of saving and learn that even with very small amounts, the savings add up. And they're also able to get loans from these groups, which they could never get from a commercial bank. And our research shows us that they tend to get the loans to start small businesses or enhance their businesses. But sometimes they need a loan for a family emergency. And they repay the loan with interest, and at the end of the year, the whole fund is distributed. So they're earning a profit on their savings as well. And then the final piece is early childhood education. So when they turn 3, the children are enrolled in playgroups and they socialize with each other and hear stories and start learning numbers and letters. And then as they get a bit older, start learning to read and do basic arithmetic so that when primary school starts, they're ready to learn. So again, a holistic approach to surrounding children with everything they need. And the final area we focus on is climate. This is a critical and transformative area because 80% of those living in poverty around the world depend on subsistence farming. Mm. And the hunger season, which is a term I wasn't familiar with until I joined Episcopal Relief and Development.
I'm not familiar with that either.
It's a time in many parts of the world, it's a season of drought, and it's called the hunger season because food's not growing. Sadly, the hunger season is growing in many parts of the world and getting longer and intense. So in our climate work, we work with communities on climate smart agriculture, things like drought resistant seeds, diversifying crops, crop rotation, land management, water management, livestock management, all those skills needed to help families stay where they are, stay in their communities, and thrive and have food security and income, secure sources of income. And the other piece of the climate piece is resilience to prepare for and mitigate the impact of climate-caused disasters. So that's a very rapid nutshell of our work. I encourage folks to go on episcopalrelief.org where you can learn more about each area of work and also each area around the world in which we work.
That's comprehensive, Josephine. And so as you're talking, I'm realizing that, tell us a little bit more about how you do this work. I mean, it doesn't sound like as a staff member at ERD, you're getting in the airplane to make this stuff happen and visiting home. How do you tell us a little bit about that?
Right, that's a very good point. And no, our staff does not deploy all over the world to actually do the work. All of our work, both in the US and globally, depends on a community empowerment model called asset-based community development. And some folks at Trinity may be very familiar with that model. It's an accompaniment model. We learn from and listen to the partners we work with. We learn about their hopes and dreams, their resources, their knowledge, their skills, and co-design programs with them that we know will not only be culturally appropriate and work in their contexts, but help folks have agency and tap into their own capacity to make change happen for themselves. So it's eminently more efficient than deploying staff all over the world to do the work, but it's also eminently more effective and sustainable because the folks in the community have a vested interest in doing the work and they have a passion for doing the work themselves. And it's also consonant with our baptismal covenant to respect the dignity of every human being and respect their own gifts and agency and help them tap into that to make change happen for themselves. So that's an important piece of how we do everything we do at Episcopal Relief and Development.
That is very important. And I love the way how, as you say, it is what's most important, it's more effective. Mm-hmm. It's so much more effective. I'm curious, are there any things that ERD is doing around COVID-19, either here in the US or anywhere else?
Absolutely. COVID-19 is one of those disasters that just keeps coming. I mean, unlike a hurricane that hits and then it's gone, it hit months ago and it looks like it's going to be here for months to come. we've done a great deal of work, both in the US and globally. In the US, we've done a lot of work to equip Episcopalians and congregations and dioceses to navigate the pandemic, and also to design their own outreach ministries that can help in light of the pandemic. We have a rich set of resources on our website, including webinars on topics ranging from how to help folks access government assistance to caring for caregivers and grief in connection with COVID, to reaching out to the most vulnerable. Sadly, this pandemic, as with all disasters, impacts the most vulnerable the hardest. So working with immigrant communities, homeless communities, the elderly, and addressing isolation and domestic violence. Sadly, some people have had to shelter with their abusers during COVID-19. So all of those issues, there are a lot of great resources on our website about that. We've also provided some emergency grants in the US to help congregations and dioceses help their communities with basic needs like food, utility payments, rent payments, diapers, gas for their cars, mental health counseling services, proper precautions in shelters to have appropriate spacing of beds and cleaning supplies, sanitation supplies, and personal protective equipment. So those types of resources. The Episcopal Asset Map has also become very important during COVID. I know you're familiar with it, Scott and Connie. Many of you at Trinity may be familiar with it. It's a joint project between the Episcopal Church and Episcopal Relief and Development that literally maps every congregation and Episcopal school and as many Episcopal ministries as we can get to participate in the map, so that folks can find ministries when they need them. Right now, if you were to go on episcopalchurch.org and click on Find a Church, it would pull up the data on the asset map. So folks can find Trinity in Asheville and see when your worship services are and see a description about your ministry. You can also update it. There's a place that says, update this place. You just click on that and you can describe other ministries. You all have so many important outreach ministries. And if you can describe those and explain which ones are open during COVID and what precautions are being taken, it's really helpful for people to be able to find those ministries. And
I know that when you click on downtown Asheville, actually the one that comes up first is the Church of the Advocate, which is
right.
the homeless ministry that's housed here at Trinity, and that's feeding every Sunday and clothing and counseling and our medical station. And so, yeah, no, that has been a really, really important piece. Are there any programs of ERD that's have been put on hold due to COVID-19 or adjusted?
No, actually, that's been a beautiful part of the way in which we do the work, because it's done by folks on the ground rather than depending on our staff traveling. It continues.
Wow.
We've been able to have Zoom calls very much like this with partners who are doing this work around the world. And we have calls in what we call communities of practice. So folks who are doing work with children or women or climate or monitoring and evaluation work, which is an important part of what we do. We rigorously monitor and evaluate all of our programs. We tweak them to improve them, or if they're not working, we abandon them and move on.
Yeah.
But because of this technology, we've been able to gather folks by Zoom and continue to have conversations, talk about best practices. Early conversations were about how to continue the work in safe ways in light of COVID. And we've been so inspired by our partners who are continuing the work and have come up with innovative ways to do it. For example, with the Episcopal Farm Workers Ministry, I know you're familiar with in the eastern part of the state. They have such important feeding ministries and other ministries that are helping farm workers recover from impacts of hurricanes. And they quickly changed that feeding ministry to a drive-through model where everyone wears masks and gloves and distributes the food in a safe way rather than having them come into a building. Yeah. In Houston, where the post-Harvey work continues. Yeah. Volunteers can't safely travel to Houston and stay in close quarters and work together in close quarters the way they once did. So that work has shifted to contractors who can often do the work on their own and who need the work during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Globally, in the early childhood development work, for example, the community volunteers still visit homes, but they wear masks. They wash their hands carefully as soon as they get there to be safe and also to model that behavior. They meet outside instead of in the homes. The savings groups meet outdoors and in spaced ways so that it can be done safely. So all of the work continues in safe and innovative ways, which is really, really exciting.
Yeah, well, I want to note two things. First, Episcopal Farm Workers Ministry. We had actually a team from Trinity ready to travel there as they've been in conversation with the Episcopal Farm Workers Ministry, and we were setting up a partnership to engage with them. And just at the last minute, we're not able to do that. So it's wonderful to hear that the ministry is continuing in such ways of strength. But also, I want to see what you would say to, take the hurricane right now that I know there's recovery going on. I think what is so important for members of Episcopal churches probably is that, as you know this, Josephine and Connie, that in some Christian denominations, there's a great culture of when a disaster such as a hurricane strikes in a certain area, they have things in place where, they tell everybody to grab all their old clothes and all their old shoes and bring food to a certain church's parking lot. And there's big vans set up and we're going to drive down there and fix things up. And that isn't quite the culture in the Episcopal Church, but I've grown to realize from the expertise of individuals such as yourself and others in organizations like the Episcopal Relief and Development, that's not often the most helpful, not always the most helpful thing to do. Could you just say a few things about that?
Sure. It's so understandable that when a disaster happens, all of us want to do something.
Yeah.
And either jump in the car or do what we can do to help people, and we want to get involved and get involved with them right away. Sadly, that for the folks on the ground who have had the impact of the disaster, they often call that the disaster after the disaster. Because if things come in, then it puts a burden on them to collect them, to sort them, to decide how to distribute them. If people just show up to volunteer and do work, I mean, think about Louisiana right now in Lake Charles. They have no water and no electricity.
Yeah.
To the extent there are available hotel rooms, they need those for the utility workers who are going to help get the lights back on and get the water flowing.
Right.
They need those hotel rooms now for evacuees who can't go to big shelters and have big congregant sheltering the way they could have had pre-COVID. They're very concerned about COVID rates spiking, and having people come in from all over the country raises even more of a concern about that. What we do at Episcopal Relief and Development is work with communities. We're working right now with the Diocese of Texas and Western Louisiana to design outreach ministries that will help the most vulnerable in their communities. Often that emergency response is providing gift cards, for example, to Walmart or local grocery stores or hardware stores, which has the advantage, first of all, of giving the person who's been impacted the agency and dignity to go to a store and shop for what they want, rather than going to pick up something that may be some old prom dress that somebody got out of their closet.
Ramen noodles.
Ramen noodles, yeah. So I, as someone who's been impacted, can go to a store and select what I need for my family, which gives me agency and dignity, and also helps keep the economy going there and helps keep people working who are at the employees at the stores. So that's the model that we follow. We're accepting donations right now for hurricane recovery. And that's how we put it to use, by empowering communities to design the relief and recovery programs they need and do the work themselves to get their communities back on their feet.
Well, thank you for just kind of filling that out, because I have, as you know, as a rector of an Episcopal church, it's one of the most powerful ways that we can encourage our members to participate when there is a disaster, such as a hurricane or the fires, or, so, I mean, I get calls, what are we doing? How can we help?
Mm-hmm.
And uh, Episcopal Relief and Development for these larger, either national or global responses is really the most effective way we can participate in reaching out, in caring, in helping recovery. And so, as a matter of fact, this week, I guess it was Friday, in your weekly email from Trinity, there is an announcement about how to give to Episcopal Relief and Development for the hurricane relief as well. So that's an important piece as well. I mean, we as a local parish have, it can often be very difficult either for a local parish or even a diocese. I mean, we have a wonderful diocese here in Western North Carolina, and yet overall it's a small diocese. And so for us to garner the energy, not just energy, but the mechanism to reach out for something like hurricane relief or wildfires is really, it's so much more powerful that we partner
right.
with Episcopal Relief and Development to have that done, not just done, but as you described, done well.
Thank you.
Yeah,
and I would also add, it's a way for folks at Trinity to reach out to their neighbors around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, the children and women we work with and folks who are dealing with trying to grow crops in these tough climates around the world, they're dealing with disasters every day. Yeah. And one of the things that the pandemic has really reminded me of is what a global village we are. I mean,
yeah.
Every one of God's children around the world is facing this same pandemic.
Right.
And it just reminds me how close we really are. And for folks who are at Trinity in Asheville or at a church in Charlotte or a church in wherever in the US, you can be part of that work that Episcopal Relief and Development is doing around the world, working together with communities to make lasting change by engaging with us and by supporting our work. So we're grateful for that, and we appreciate it.
Well, we're grateful for the partnership. We're grateful for the work that you do and all the other staff at Episcopal Relief and Development. And we thank you. Thank you for this time. Thank you for the engagement, for the information, and for one of the pieces that we're focusing on in our life here during this pandemic, during these times of distance, is reminding ourselves that we are a people of hope. And it is the hope that we are given in God that keeps us strong and faithful even in these times, as we look forward to that time when we are all back together again. So Josephine, thank you for being with us. Connie, thank you for being with us. I know that members of Trinity now will put a name and face together a little bit better, Connie, so that if they have questions, even more questions about Episcopal Relief and Development, they know who to reach out to as well. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Trinity Church, for this great morning. We will see you in just about 15 minutes for worship. And God bless you all, and take care. Have a great, great day.